To me, this is a near perfect dinner. Indian/British food is beloved and world-renowned for good reason. And to me, curries like this chicken tikka masala are good all year round. I don't know, there's some dishes that I associate with certain seasons, but something like this I would enjoy at any time of the year, no matter what the weather's like. Maybe that's just me. But yeah, I've made butter chicken before, so I decided it was time to try this similar tikka masala. I also paired it with trying to make garlic naan for the first time. And just stay tuned, you're going to see some mistakes that I make with both parts of the dish, but I think it's worth it to stay tuned because I'm going to show you what I do in these situations when something like this happens. So as always, this is not going to be something that I consider authentic, but at this time this channel exists to show me learning my way through the kitchen and learning different recipes. I think there's value in that, and if you do too, then I really appreciate you. Anyway, here's what I did. I started with a little less than 2 pounds of chicken thighs. I'm just roughly trimming off the excess fat off the sides. You don't have to be too precise here. Some people cut them into the bite-sized chunks here, but I prefer to leave the thighs whole. I just feel like there's less to keep track of when you're cooking, and it's easier to control everything and you have less pieces to worry about. But I think both methods work fine, whatever suits you better. And then I'm just putting them into a bowl so that we can marinate them. I'm going to start by salting the chicken. I usually do this by eyeballing it until I can see everything's coated well, but I would say this is probably about a teaspoon of salt. Then I have a paste of about 5 to 7 garlic cloves and about a 2-inch knob of ginger. You can mince these with a knife, but I figured since I had so many of them, I would just dump it all into my molcajete and just pound away until I got this paste texture. Then I'm going in with the juice of half of a lemon or about a tablespoon. Then a signature ingredient for this dish that's going to help the chicken stay juicy and tender once it's cooked, 120 grams or about a half cup of whole milk plain yogurt. And then for my seasonings, I'm just eyeballing once again, but I'll estimate that these are all about a teaspoon each. I'm using garam masala, coriander, turmeric, cumin, and traditionally it would be Kashmiri chili powder, but I didn't have that, so I'm just using regular store-bought chili powder. However, I'm told that it's a little stronger than Kashmiri chili powder, so I'm supplementing with some paprika. I'm doing like 2 parts paprika to 1 part chili powder. Then the most effective way to mix this is by hand, so I'm just throwing a glove on and mixing everything together until it's cohesive and evenly distributed. Cover that and marinate in the fridge for at least 4 hours up to overnight. Now to cook this, my idea was to take a big pot and add a couple tablespoons of ghee, and then I would just sear the chicken in batches that would get some browning on it, as well as create a fond on the bottom that would serve as a base for our sauce. So that is what I did. I seared my chicken in 2 batches and flipped it constantly to try to get some browning on it. However, as you can see, the fond on the bottom is starting to burn before there's any real browning on the chicken. And I believe that's from how much marinade is still in the chicken that is kind of inhibiting it from browning, because all the heat is going into that marinade instead of onto the chicken. But anyway, I tried to brown all of my chicken, and then I wanted to see if there was anything salvageable in this fond, so I dumped in my whole yellow onion that I chopped up, and I was trying to scrape away at the bottom, but as you can see, it wasn't really working. So I thought for a minute, and then my solution was to take this onion out before it became too burnt, and then I had to get rid of this burnt fond because it would ruin my sauce otherwise. The easiest way to do that is to put it over high heat and add water to it, and use your wooden spatula to scrape up the bottom until it's gone. I did this in a couple iterations and just discarded what I scraped up and added more water until I got all the way to the bottom. So that takes care of the burnt fond problem, but our other problem is that our chicken isn't well browned or cooked through. So what I did off camera is I took the whole tray and put it in the oven under high broiler setting, and I just moved the tray around every few minutes to get everything evenly browned. After about 15 minutes, I had some good browning and most of the chicken was cooked through. So that means we're back in business, back to making the sauce. So I'm starting again with a couple tablespoons of fresh ghee, and I'm adding back in the partially browned onions that we saved from earlier. I would also give them a couple pinches of salt. I just forgot to do it here among all the chaos. Just stir those around and cook them down for about 5 minutes or so just to get them more softened up. And then I'm just adding in another 4 cloves of garlic that I pressed, along with another inch knob of ginger that I grated in. Give those a stir for another 30 to 60 seconds, and then we're going to add in all the same seasonings that we put into the marinade. I'm just probably doing about half the amount inside this sauce. Giving them just like 30 seconds to toast up in this hot pan is going to bring out their flavors more. Also around the same time, I'm adding in about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste and letting that toast as well and adhere to the bottom. And then before things burn again, I'm going to add in this 14-ounce can of petite diced tomatoes. You could do crushed tomatoes or a pureed sauce, but I'm going to show you why that doesn't matter with my method. I'm using the liquid from the can to help me deglaze this pan and scrape off all the fond from the bottom. And once I feel like that's all cleaned up, I'm going to take out my blender. Now I've read that some recipes say it's better to leave everything chunky and then you have all the texture in the sauce. I just prefer all this to be smooth, so not only am I going to blend all this up for about a minute or so, I'm going to pour it back into the pot through a strainer. And really take your time to press all the liquid through the strainer and keep behind all those fibers from the vegetables. To me, I just prefer not to eat all this in the sauce. I prefer mine to be smoother and creamy, but you do you. It is a little extra work, and you do have to clean out a blender and a sieve, so you can consider this to be optional. And lastly, I'm just adding in about a cup of heavy cream. This is what's going to bring everything together and give it that luscious texture. From here, you can just adjust the consistency to your preference by adding more water if it's too thick, or just reducing it over heat if it's too thin. And of course, you're going to have to salt this to taste. You have to compensate for all the ingredients you added that were unseasoned. Also, this is the time when I'm going to take my chicken and cut it into my bite-sized chunks. Obviously, if you already did this before marinating, you don't have to do it here. But yeah, I'm just going to dump all that into my sauce, and don't forget all those juices that were left behind on the tray. Lastly, I just sprinkle in a couple handfuls of chopped cilantro. I save a little bit for garnish on top as well. You can just keep this warm over low heat until you serve it. You can serve this with some basmati rice or some naan, or you could probably do both, but I figured everyone knows how to make rice, so that would be one less step I have to do in this video. So I'm going to make some homemade naan. And obviously I'm no expert and this is my first time, but like I said, there's some useful tips that I learned along the way that I thought I would pass off to you in case they'd be useful to you too. I start with 120 mils or a half cup of warm whole milk, to which I add 8 grams or 2 teaspoons of sugar, as well as 3 grams or about a half of a packet of active dry yeast. Mix all that together and let it proof for about 5 minutes while you get the rest of your ingredients ready. Into the bowl of a stand mixer, I'm adding 300 grams or 2.5 cups of bread flour and another 120 grams or a half cup of whole milk plain yogurt. Add in your
frothy boy
and 30 mils or 2 tablespoons of a neutral oil. Then optionally you can add in 2 cloves of well minced garlic. I would only do this if you have a garlic press that can mince it really fine like this. If you just use a knife and cut it, those chunks might not sit well in the dough. Either way, finish up with 5 grams or a teaspoon of baking powder and 3 grams or a half teaspoon of kosher salt. Using the dough hook attachment, we're just going to mix all this together until it's well combined and then knead it on high speed for like 6 to 8 minutes. If you notice the dough is too wet, you can always add a little more flour and see how that plays in. Remember, it depends on your environment how much flour you're going to need in doughs like this, and also the types of flour that you use. Different amounts can be absorbed in different ways, so just play it by ear. But regardless, once it's a cohesive ball and it pulls away from the sides and it feels sticky but not enough to stick to your hands, it's done. We're going to transfer that to an oiled bowl and then cover it and let it rest for 1 hour to 2 hours to let it double in size. Mine took 2 hours. Once it's there, you can punch it out and then dump it onto a lightly floured work surface. And then you can cut it into like 6 to 8 equal pieces. I decided to go with 7 because I just wanted more than 6. As long as they hover around 100 grams a piece, you should be good, which I am using my kitchen scale to keep everything accurate. And then we take each of those pieces and fold all the edges into itself so you can turn it over and form it into a ball. You can kind of swirl it around on your countertop to tighten everything up. Then we add all those pieces to a baking sheet and then cover with a towel and let it proof for at least 30 more minutes. Okay, finally we're ready to heat these up, and I'm using a cast iron skillet because I think that's the closest thing you're going to get to the tandoor ovens that they use. I'm heating that for a few minutes over medium high just so that it's ready once we get the naan ready. So I'm just going to take each piece and roll it out with a rolling pin on a non-floured work surface because we want it to stick down so that it can stretch as far as possible. I thought I rolled these to almost as thin as possible, but as you're going to see, they're going to thicken up a little bit when you cook them. I'm not entirely sure how to keep them that thin once they're done cooking because what I've gotten in restaurants maintains that really thin texture. If you have any ideas to why this happened, let me know. But either way, once it's an even thickness, you're going to lay it into that hot cast iron. Try to press it all the way down into the grooves of the pan so you get as much surface contact as possible. So it's kind of hard to know when to flip these, but you will see some bubbles start to rise to the top, which starts to give you an indication that it's ready to be flipped. And as you can see, some of these came out super charred, which I don't think that's the end of the world because you do want those really blackened bits to give you that signature flavor, but I would have probably wanted a little less than what you see here. I'd say I went for about a minute to a minute and 15 seconds on each side of each of these naan. But once it's done, I'm going to put it onto a wire rack to keep it crispy, and I'm just going to repeat with the rest of my naan until everything's done. Also, my induction burner was doing this weird thing where it kept flipping from the heat setting that I had it on to a temperature setting, and it would just drastically drop the temperature, and even when I would press it to go back to the heat setting, it would just revert back. So I don't know if there's something wrong with it or I was doing something wrong. I don't know, but that kind of messed with my results a little bit as well. But anyway, this is going to be a garlic naan, so I'm going to make some garlic butter to brush on top of these. So I took about 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter and melted that in a small sauce pot, to which I added 2 cloves of minced garlic, and then I just swirled everything around to infuse that garlic flavor. You don't want to go too far to brown the butter or to brown the garlic in this case, just a little bit to heat that garlic flavor out of it a bit. Then I'm going to kill the heat and add a handful of chopped cilantro because you do need that greenery in there to give it the signature look. Ideally, you have this ready before the naan are ready so you can brush it onto them while they're still hot and they can absorb the most of the butter. And I brush it on both sides because more garlic butter, more better. Okay, so at this point we have our warm buttery naan and our warm chicken tikka masala. We avoided a couple of crises along the way, but we made it to the end. And yeah, you can see the naan's a little thicker than what you're probably used to at an Indian restaurant, and it does look a tad doughy in the middle, but I don't know if anybody would say that this looks bad. Maybe you would, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just going to serve up a little bit of the chicken tikka masala in a bowl, and then the naan on the side. And don't forget to put a couple of cilantro leaves on top of the curry to give you that distinct restaurant look. Knowing what I went through making this dish, I'd say this looks like a success. But the only way to really tell is to taste it, so let's do that. So we've made it after lots of mistakes and learning opportunities. If anything, let this video serve as a reminder that you don't have to be perfect in the kitchen. You can always find ways to work with whatever you have and whatever ends up happening. But the key is the more you make those mistakes, the more you can find different ways to fix them. And for someone like me who is nowhere near a professional and has no education and very little experience, this small channel doesn't really have the ability to do multiple iterations of a dish like this. So I guess what I can give out is how I managed to work with what happened. But all in all, this looks great. It came out great as far as I can tell. The only thing that's left is to taste test. Obviously these naan are a little thicker than what I'm used to getting at restaurants. I tried to roll them out very thin, but I still have to work on that process. This is my first time, so let's see what they taste like. I'm gonna go by itself first. I'm gonna say that's not bad. It is a little doughy because it's a little thick on the inside, so it didn't cook as thoroughly as it would if it was thinner without the outside burning. But with the garlic butter on the outside and then the little garlic pieces put throughout the dough, it still tastes great. And it still resembles a naan that I would get at a restaurant. It's just probably not as good. But let me go into this curry with it. Yep, that's it. That's all you need right there. Whatever airiness or shortcomings that you have in the naan are immediately forgotten about once you dip it into this curry. Which, speaking of, let's try a little bit with the chicken. That's the stuff right there. And even though we had a little bit of burn fun on the bottom at the beginning, the little workaround that we did to eliminate it, you can't even tell that there's any burnt pieces in here, which, like I'm saying, this is what you can do the more you get experience in the kitchen. The moral of the story is you're probably not going to use this naan recipe. You might use this tikka masala recipe. I do recommend it. It's really good. But if you can take anything from this video, maybe there's some entertainment, maybe a little bit of education, but just the driving point that it doesn't matter if you're not a professional, if you don't have a lot of experience. The only way to get experience, if you like doing this, is to get in the kitchen and to work on it. I personally had a blast, even though I didn't do this perfectly, but that's okay. If you do have any tips for me on this cooking process, if you have more experience in Indian cuisine, then definitely let me know in the comments. But otherwise, thank you for watching this far, and I'll see y'all next time.